Today we're going to continue the conversation about the pension concern at our local and state level, and we're going to be specifically talking a bit about Sutter and Yuba counties. And I wanted to start off with mentioning that yesterday I was up in Placer County at what we call the Mother Lode Conference of about 8 or 9 counties up in this area, including Yuba County's Auditor-Controller Rich Eberly. And so we were talking and learning from a 30-year actuary up there. And this actuary, his name is Ira. He used to work at CalPERS, is a very bright man, and had a lot of interesting things to say. Well, I wanted to let everyone know that we learned that changing pensions with CalPERS is an even greater task or more difficult than we had imagined. Now we knew that it's costly to do so, but we learned that the cost is so incredibly high at present rules that there's almost no ability to in any kind of short term, saying in the next 10 or so years, to even begin to address this. So there's ways to work at it, but actually closing and moving towards a more defined contribution style plan for employees, and I'm talking about new employees, not employees that currently work there. I have to always say that because I don't want to agitate current employees. That's not the intention, and that's not what happens here. But the new employees, and getting to a 401k or a defined contribution style plan for government workers, it's difficult. Now there has been examples. Yes, please.
Can I ask you a question? You said something about you're worried about people finding out that this is in fact the truth. They have to know that this is truth, and how serious it is. And you may not like it, or you may get upset about it. But this is, just because you don't like the way the Titanic is going down, you can stop rearranging your deck chairs. So I just wanted to say that this is going to happen whether you like it or you don't.
It's hard truth, yes. And the more we can do today, as I continually repeat, the better off we'll be, because all of these impacts are exponential, whether good or bad, over time. So yes, learn some hard truths, but there are also glimmers of hope, and there are ways out of it. And a few weeks ago, I mentioned Senate Bill 681 by Senator Moorlach, authored by Senator Moorlach, who is senator out of Orange County, or at least in part that's his district. Senator Moorlach put together a pretty nice bill, and it's been amended in April. But it does address and deal with some of the concerns at CalPERS. Interesting to note is Orange County is not a CalPERS entity. Orange County has its own retirement system. So it's, call it the Orange County retirement system or something along those lines. So they are not with CalPERS, but nevertheless, Senator Moorlach has put forth a really interesting bill to address the very concerns that I was articulating when I began. That is the difficulty in extricating yourself from the CalPERS system for new employees. So what he does very specifically is in Section 1 of his bill, 681, SB 681, he says that or his interest would be that the public agency, the employer, so in this case, for me, Sutter County would be able to withdraw its net assets paid into the system. And so what that means is the monies that we've put into CalPERS over time, we would conceivably be able to get those monies drawn out of CalPERS. We would then create our own county retirement system, separate. It would be some kind of trust, separate from CalPERS, and we would be definitely 100% on the hook for all pensions and all unfunded pension liabilities as of the date that we do this. So there's no city of Loyalton kind of concept here. There's no cutting of pension benefits. I want to be real clear on that. But there is a pathway out of it, again, if SB 681 were to be signed by the governor.
Let me ask you, Nate, can Yuba County join you in this effort?
I think that first of all, the likelihood of this passing in Sacramento is close to zero. So we got to be real as we're talking through these things. That is, we we need to talk about opportunities, but also be real about the probability of those things occurring. But how do we increase the probability of those things passing and that? Well, it's only through building bridges and coalitions with our partners. So Yuba County, Colusa County, all of these northern counties need to come together at least and start this conversation of, hey, we want, you have the state of Jefferson movement and the representation movement or lack of representation movement, and that's great. But, we also have so many counties up in Northern California have this in common. All 8 or 9 counties that were represented yesterday at the Motherlode Conference with me up in Placer County, all of us are in CalPERS. We're all in it together. We're all something like 60 to 75% funded. We all are in the same kind of problem. So we should come together.
You're also in RCRC.
Yes.
Yes. I would think that and the State of Jefferson organization might be a way to start to get people to start pulling together, because what do they say? Either we look for a solution together or all hang together,
Right.
When the Constitution was done. Yeah.
Right. So at any rate, this SB 681 is very interesting. And I did want to also mention that Senator Morlock is a CPA. And so I mentioned that to say this is an accountant in the legislative body who is trying to make good changes. And as far as I can see, he's the only one who's made any kind of stab at this CalPERS problem. So moving on, I wanted to mention one other Senate bill that pertains to auditor-controllers, if you would allow. So Senate Bill 292, and I'll try to move through this fairly quickly, but Senate Bill 292 is a wonderful bill, and because of the issues that occurred a number of years ago with my predecessor, Auditor-Controller Robert Stark, and the legal issues that he encountered, we the auditor controllers have come together, and we've got about 45 auditor controllers all jumping on and supporting SB 292. This is from Orange County once again. Orange County Auditor Controller Eric Woolery, who I sat down and had dinner with last week. I should say a week ago Friday. And at any rate, this bill is one vote away from going to the governor's desk for signature. It's passed all of the hurdles. And what this bill does is it puts the auditor controller on par with the sheriff and the assessor for a very specific issue and reason. And so let me quickly explain the catch-22 that we auditor controllers encounter. What is an auditor controller? Well, an auditor controller is the county elected official. And in this case, what I'm talking about is we're the ones that approve every claim against the county. And what do you mean by claim? I mean every check we write, the county, to any vendor, any whether it's payroll for the employees, all of those checks, every single one must go through the auditor controller's office for approval, and then the treasurer issues the check. Okay, so with that, what happens in this catch-22 is we will have a claim that is payable according to, say, a supervisor or the supervisors or the staff of the supervisors, the county supervisors, and we determine through our audit that the claim is an unlawful payment. That is, we can't in good conscience pay it. And that's our job. Well, but so we're in a catch-22 because we have supervisors who can, by threat of law, of suit, telling us to pay it, and then we, on the other hand, know that we can't pay it. So we're stuck in the middle of our duty as auditor controller, but also with threat of legal suit. So this is what happened to Robert Stark in a form of it. And at the time, there was no ability for Robert to get an attorney other than to pay for it himself. So what Senate Bill 292 does, in a few words, is it allows that we can go before a presiding judge of the Superior Court, state our case. The auditor controller can state his case and indicate why there's a conflict of interest with county counsel. And if they can persuade the judge sufficiently, then the judge will order the board of supervisors to hire attorney on the behalf of the auditor controller.
I understand it cost him almost $300,000. Is that correct?
It was more than that. Yes, it was closer to 400.
That's a crime.
Yes,
that's criminal.
Yep, and he had to eat that entire amount. It was actually about $450,000, but he was able to raise some $50,000 to $60,000 from local community. From the community, and so that left him with $300, almost $400,000 of money he had to spend for his own.
Wow.
So there's some interesting quotations regarding the same. I thought I might read a couple of them because they're really nice to me in illuminating the role of auditor-controller as well as the challenges we face. But here's a pretty wonderful quote from Riverside Auditor-Controller Paul Angulo, who's a good man, and I've got to know Paul pretty well. So he says, right now, the supervisors have the allegiance of county attorneys. That would be county counsel. So right now, our leverage, that is the auditor-controller's leverage, is nothing more than shaming people. That is, we write a report, and we go to the board, and Paul asks, how is that authority? So all we can do is write a report and then explain it. And so this is a way for us to be a little bit more on even footing with our peers, other department heads, such as the sheriff and assessor, as well as the board members, because of our, and the way I explained it when I went before the legislator in Sacramento when we were speaking in favor of this is I said this is an alignment of the auditor-controller's responsibilities with the authorities. So if you're going to make us responsible to not pay claims that are illegal, you also need to provide us with the resources to defend ourselves should somebody think that it should be paid, and we disagree. So that's a pretty great movement, and I appreciate Eric Woolery, Orange County, in authoring and moving this forward, as well as Senator Bates, who is carrying it through the Senate. She's been really great. Okay. Another topic that I thought Matt might be real interested in was an article that came out in the California Political Review. And this is August 7th, 2017 by Stephen Frank. And it's interesting to note. So you see, I said earlier that we do have glimmers of hope. There's ways out of this. It does seem like a very difficult situation, and it is, but what we can't say is it's impossible. My colleague always reminds me that nothing's impossible, and first we think of it that way, but then we start whittling away at it, and then pretty soon we've solved it. So let's see what is possible here. UC leads on pension loans. Our 401k plans next. That's the title of the article. The main thrust of the article is this, that about 10 months or so ago, UC began a new 401k style individual investment plan. So instead of the new hire coming in and being compelled to participate in what would be, I suppose, CalSTRS, I believe UC is, or maybe it's in its own system, pardon me, that they can, instead of going into the pension system, they can instead select the 401k style individual investment plan. So in the first 10 months, this is, for me, I don't know if I want to say surprising, but encouraging. In the first 10 months of this new option, 35% of the 6,411 employees chose it. So that is to say that 2,244 or so of the 6,000 employees went ahead and said, you know what, we're going to put our faith in our own hands as opposed to our betters in the retirement system. And you know, speaking of myself here for a moment, I'm 33 years old, and I'm contributing to the CalPERS system as an employee of Sutter County, and I'm also contributing to Social Security. Both of those systems take an enormous amount of my paycheck away, but I have very little confidence that there will actually be a benefit at that end of my career.
Because you are self-employed, why don't you tell us how much Social Security they actually take? Because everybody goes. Well,
yeah, Social Security is 15.3% of your wages.
If you're self-employed.
Well, it's 7.65% of your employee wages, but the other 7.65 is borne by the employer. And so the idea is, if the employer is paying that on your behalf, they would otherwise pay that directly to you if they didn't have that obligation. So in my opinion, you would have gotten all 15% if you weren't participating in Social Security, the employer and the employee share. They're paying it for you.
I hate to think what I would actually have had I contributed Social Security to a private savings account, merely a savings account, not a mutual fund, not anything spectacular, but just a simple, you can't take it away from me account.
Yeah, and on a personal side, that's my interest for government in general. Is I believe that the risk that the assets that you contribute over time, that they bear enough yield to fund your retirement. I believe that risk should be borne by the individual and not by the greater taxpayers. And also, there, as I'm trying to peel back this onion and understand it fully, I'm finding that there are so many reasons why it's more appropriate for the 401k style system. And I'm not talking about just for the taxpayers and just for the employers. I'm talking about for the individuals too. So, for example, you are compelled to be in a pension program, but you personally would rather be in a 401k. Here are just a couple of the concerns you may have with how that pension system is running. Well, you know, the folks on the CalPERS board, the board of trustees, they're now divesting from certain stocks that you would, if you had the ability to invest, you would invest because they're lucrative stocks. They produce high yields. So that's one example. There's other examples of, well, maybe you have. I will say that CalPERS is a fairly efficient organization. It has fairly low fees when you look at the $500 billion that it invests. So the fees itself are pretty low, but as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, their return this most recent fiscal year ended 6/30/17 was 11.2%, and the S&P 500 index, it's just the index, returned 15.5%. So my point of saying that is that although they're lean and mean, they aren't achieving some of the returns that I would hope that they could have. Now, I understand risk mitigation and diversification, and there's a lot to it, but
based upon the retirement schedule and the rate of return that they're getting right now, would you classify CalPERS as a Ponzi scheme? I know that's heavy wording for it, but I'm just trying to use an analogy that people understand, that you are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul and George and Sally. And, you know.
Insofar as we're not fully funded, I think there is something to that. And we're not fully funded. We're in the low 70s as a plan. That is our assets versus how much liability there is. But I would say that that's probably more applicable to the federal government, frankly, and the Social Security system and the Medicare system, because both of those trust funds, in the air quotes, have been pillaged. And billions of dollars have been taken from those trust funds that were set in there. It's just the same as the CalPERS situation. It's just the federal CalPERS system, right? You know, if you want to call it that. And they should never have taken the assets that were put away for the Social Security retiree payments. They pillaged those, and they've used them for general fund spending. And in their place, they've put T-bills or notes, IOUs. That to me, that should never have been done.
I understand. And, two of those bills you discussed, and, cut me off if I'm getting too far back, but too far off the road. But at this point in time, what you're doing is you're taking back the constitutional authority of your office. Isn't that correct? Isn't that what those bills are designed to do?
Yeah, that's what I would call it, and especially on SB 292 relating to the Auditor-Controller. Again, authorities need to be in line with the responsibilities. How can you ask us to do something but not give us the tools to do it?
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
I just thought that's just
another
way of saying it. Yeah.
Here's another kind of interesting way to think about the control that you give up when you enter into a retirement system such as the CalPERS system as an individual employee. So UC, the same article from August 7th, the UC article says this, that in 2000, the UC retirement system was overfunded by 156%. So they had 56% extra assets at the UC retirement system than they assumed that they needed to pay out in liability. So very much overfunded. That is a great place to be. Well, what happened is they said, oh, hey, everything is wonderful. And so shortly before 2000, they began a contribution holiday. They stopped requiring contributions from most employers, and I understand all employees. Forget this, 20 years. 20 years. So they stopped asking for money for 20 years from all of the UC system employers or schools. And so what happened is, and that's not the only obviously issue. There are some economic issues here with the greater economy and its impact on stocks and things like that. But suffice it to say that they went from 156 super funded to now 77% funded as of the most recent fiscal year end. So 156 down to 77, which that's more than 50% cut. So they're contributing again, obviously, and one other point on that the article made is 15 years into this now 20-year pay holiday that they ended up taking. 15 years in, the numbers people. I'm sorry, my dates are not lining up here perfectly, but this was around 2005. So this was 15 years into the holiday, and they said, "Hey, we need to start contributing again." Well, because of the slowness of government or for whatever reason, it took another 5 years for them ultimately to start making contributions again, or requiring the employers to make contribution and the employees. So that's 20 years total of what I would call kind of. It doesn't mean that there couldn't have been some holiday in there, but 20 years is egregious, and it's the proof is in the pudding. As they're at 77% funded today, I would have recommended that they took a more conservative approach and stayed super funded and monitored that to ensure that they did, including not holidaying for 20 years. Maybe each year it's reassessed every single time, so that you don't get into this situation of unfunded liability.
Can I draw an analogy real quick? If I think about this in terms of my life, okay, so if somebody told me we have plenty of money right now, you don't need to pay your car insurance payment for the next 20 years, and then 20 years down the line they're like, okay, we need money now, start paying a car insurance payment again, I think I would be kind of pissed off. I'd be like, what the heck? I haven't had to pay this in 20 years. Is that the situation right now with the people that are now having to contribute again? Is it creating this problem of now you have dissatisfied people because they have to pay again? And is that contributing to why it might have taken so long to get them to pay again, those extra 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think if I were to interview some of the decision makers at the various UC schools, I think they would say that they had impact on the UC trustees to slow that the holiday back, to take that back off the books, and to require contributions again. Look, once you say to a local agency, whether it be a school, a county, a city, and you say, hey, you can go ahead and hold on to that money for a little while for the near term, they get used to it.
Yeah.
They start budgeting based on that money being there and good. And so then when you come back and you say, oh, now I'm going to start needing that back again, the government says, oh, and it will apply. And I'm not saying every case, depends on the leaders there, but they will put pressure on the trustees, for example, to slow that rescinding of the contribution holiday.
Right.
But somebody has to be the adult in the game.
Yeah, and so we have, it's incumbent upon us accountants as well as other leaders to really explain ourselves well and persuade and show the prudence of addressing this today, and of having brainstorming sessions, of including stakeholders, of getting solutions in place. And again, we're not the first here. We're not the only. There have been other movers that have already jumped in, such as UC offering the 401k and now 35% of those new eligible hires accepted it. They accepted it because they wanted control over their retirement. And they wanted a retirement that will actually be there based upon their decisions as opposed to everybody else's decisions. So the 401k style plan at UC, this I thought was interesting as well. UC contributes 8% of pay. So they are putting up 8% of pay, which is way more than the private sector. So in the private sector, the average is approximately 3%. That is, they will match up to 3% of your contributions, you as an employee. So you put up 3% of your salary into your 401k plan, which is, by the way, is deductible, and then they'll put up to 3%. Well, at the UC system, they're doing 8%. So even in a 401k setting, the UC system is providing a very lucrative retirement to the individuals, employees, but it's just allowing those individuals to manage it themselves and to make their own choices about their own retirement.
But the university system itself is not in dire straits such as PERS is, being underfunded. It's my understanding that most of the schools have a substantial savings department.
Well, the article indicates that the UC system is better funded than CalPERS at approximately 77% funded. So they're scratching 80%, which is beginning to be a fairly healthy percent, although, of course, 100% and greater is always, to me, the best. And that is compared to 69% at CalPERS. So they're 8% more funded than CalPERS, which is not insignificant. That's a big number.
And for those of you in Yuba County, the Yuba County Water Agency is 100% funded in its retirement system.
What should the UC system, what should they have done in the situation where they were super funded? I think it was 156% funded.
Yes.
Should they have looked at that and said, well, we have things that we could spend this money on in other areas. Should we take out that money? Or should they have just left it and said, hey, it's fine to be so overfunded because maybe someday we'll need that money. So just leave it. It's fine.
So when you become that super funded, I'm not so fiscally conservative to say that I wouldn't go down that path of doing some holidaying. I get that. We don't want to be 156% funded. We want to be as close to 100% as possible with some margins of error and some cushion. So I would answer you by saying, yeah, they began their holiday. And they began it well before 2000, by the way. But they began their holiday even in 2000, many years into this contribution holiday. They're still super funded, 156%. So the only thing I would really change, Matt, to answer your question, is I would put into any pay contribution holiday policy documentation that this will be reviewed annually, and that there will be certain metrics that you would outline in that policy that once achieved or once hit, it would immediately require the holiday to cease and contributions to begin again. So, for example, at 110% super funding, you immediately begin at the next fiscal period to require contributions again.
And see, that was my next question. I think it would have been prudent to include a disclaimer like, this is not permanent. This is not forever holiday. This is going to end at a point. And then make sure all of the contributors know that. Because I don't think that's what happened. Is that not what happened?
No. They let it fall, and of course there was the 2008 downturn, which most folks couldn't anticipate, which had a big impact. But again, being nimble and being always having in mind why you're there. So if you're a trustee, why are you there? You are there in a fiduciary capacity for the individual employees and employers that are members in your pool or your plan, and if you keep that in mind, you can erase all of the political pressure and the garbage that comes into and tries to impress upon you certain decisions.
All right, we're running out of time. I'm going to actually request that you come in 10 minutes or 15 minutes earlier, and because you're running out of time. We have 1 minute to wrap up, so if you do that.
Well, I
hate to cut you off, but
no. Once again, I just want to indicate my sincere appreciation to both of you for allowing me to speak on this, what I think is most important issue that the county faces, both Yuba and Sutter.
It's very interesting, and people need to know this information. So, thank you very much for being here.